Hello everyone, welcome back to Triad Travelogues. I am Richard and I'm coming at you today from Shanghai, China to bring you the very first episode of my new series, Shanghai ESL Nostalgia Tour. So for the last 3 years, I have been teaching English as a second language in Shanghai, China. Now, I didn't plan to stay in China for any longer than a year. I was going to teach here for a year, save a little bit of money, and maybe go to Europe. But what I actually ended up doing is I ended up meeting a girl, getting married, having a baby, and sort of kind of settling down a little bit, at least establishing kind of a temporary residence in Shanghai. Now, in order for you to really make money doing what I do here, you can't just have one job. One job will pay you more than a teacher in the United States makes, but definitely not enough to support a family, save money, travel, things like that. So if you really want to make money doing what I do here in Shanghai or anywhere in China, you really need to have multiple jobs. You need to get a lot of part-time work. Now, my main job is at a training center on the outskirts of Shanghai, and it's close to where I live. And it's like 24 hours a week. It's not really a lot of work. It's full-time pay for part-time work. So what I did is my first month that I was here, I decided I was gonna get extra jobs to supplement my income. And it was a really smart thing to do. So my first month, I contacted a couple of recruitment agencies and they were able to get me jobs. Now, I've gone through a lot of these part-time jobs for a number of different reasons. I've worked in public schools, private schools, training centers. I've worked in people's homes. I've done one-on-one tutoring. I have worked with high school kids, middle school, elementary school, kindergarten, pre-K. I have definitely had quite a lot of experience in the last 3 years. And the purpose of this tour, or these series of tours, is to show you the different places that I've worked, because I've worked all around the city. And I also want to tell you some stories along the way. And hopefully I can familiarize some of you with China's culture, how China looks at education, the difference between Western and Eastern education. It'll definitely be an interesting thing. We right now are at the Line 9. This is the train that basically goes from where I live all the way to the city. And we're gonna take it all the way to the terminal station, and I'm gonna show you the very first place that I ever worked with a one-to-one student. See, this is the thing. I haven't been here to this particular metro stop in like at least a year. And I don't remember exactly how to get to where I'm trying to go. So this is it. This is the exit that I used to leave from like every other day. I came out here all the time for the better part of a year, for longer than a year actually. And it used to look a lot different than this, but this is, well, like way back there, back behind all these construction things, all this construction equipment. There is the exit that I used to use, that I have spent way too long today trying to track down. So now I'm gonna take you to the Starbucks that I always used to go to. Every day when I came out here, I would always make my way off to the Starbucks. I would get a blueberry muffin, a large Americano, and I would eat and drink and be merry, and then I would be on my way to go to my private tutoring job. So the very first private tutoring job that I had in Shanghai, I got within a month of coming here. And all that I did was I went on Google and I looked up recruitment agencies in Shanghai. And I found a bunch of these places. I would later find out, I mean, China is just inundated with these places. There are thousands upon thousands of these recruitment agencies, headhunters, that are looking for foreign, white English teachers. It's not difficult to find a job teaching English in China. So I submitted my resume to a bunch of these places. And I included on my resume the experience that I had had in America. When I was living in Baltimore, Maryland, I worked as an educational paraprofessional in special education, and I worked with very difficult children. I worked with kids that had autism. I worked with kids with anger management problems. Just, you know, I worked for a long time at a private school that just strictly dealt with these kinds of kids. So I had a lot of experience in special education, particularly in dealing with children that had autism. Now, I put that on my resume, and within the hour of submitting this resume, I get a call from this recruitment agency. And the guy on the other end of the phone, he basically says, "Hey, you have experience working with difficult kids?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "I have a private tutoring job for you. It's a kid that has autism." And I said, "Okay, I can do that." And he said, "But we need to talk to you about this. It's really important that you don't say anything about his autism to his father." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Don't say anything about his autism to his mother. They know he has autism, but we don't talk about it." Now, to me, this was a foreign concept because I worked in the United States of America, where in order to really deal with a child who has developmental disabilities or any kind of issue that can be identified and diagnosed, everyone has to sort of be on the same team. The parents, the teachers, you know, the people who work with the kids, they all sort of have to be on the same page. You know, kids in special education in America, they have IEPs, they have educational plans that are individualized specifically for them, and everybody who deals with those children has access to their educational plans. So going into a job, working with a kid who has autism with this idea that we can't discuss his autism was a foreign concept to me, just such a strange thing. I later learned that this is how China is. People just do not want to admit that their children have problems. And it goes way beyond just a couple of parents. Because in the States, you might have some parents that don't believe their kid has autism for one reason or another, or they don't want to accept it. But it's not the norm. Normally, the parents just accept it so they can get the best services for their kids, that their kids can have the best education possible. But in China, it is a culture-wide problem. It is something that is simply not talked about. You know, the vast majority of children with disabilities here, if they're cognitive disabilities, developmental disabilities, disabilities that are not physically visible, but they're visible in terms of their behavior, everyone just pretends it's not happening. The parents pretend it's not happening. The teachers pretend it's not happening. They pretend the kid's totally normal. And this makes dealing with kids like that much more difficult, because, you know, the fact that they have this disability is the elephant in the room, and you sort of have to tiptoe around it. You can't talk about it with anybody. But at the time, I didn't know that this was normal in China. I just thought, okay, it's kind of weird, we can't talk about it, that's fine. So he said, "You can go tomorrow and meet with the kid and meet with his parents." And he tells me, "I just want to let you know that this kid's name was Sean. Sean's dad is difficult. He's difficult." And I said, "That's okay. I've dealt with difficult parents before." And I met him and I met his parents, and this was my very first experience with private tutoring in China, and it was insane. It was an insane experience, and I'm gonna tell you all about it. But first, we're gonna go and we're gonna see if we can find this kid's apartment. I don't remember where it is, but I think if I just sort of wander around for a couple hours, maybe we'll come upon it. So, come with me, and I'll tell you the rest of the story when we get to his apartment. I'm pretty sure that this used to be a sidewalk. I'm pretty sure that this is the road that the sidewalk that I used to walk on all the time when I left the metro station. I would walk for like 30 minutes and then I'd be at the apartment complex, and it is overgrown like a jungle. A jungle has grown where the sidewalk used to be. So it turns out that I accidentally made my way to the Thumb Plaza, which is a place I was going to go after I went to Sean's apartment. But now that we're here, we may as well explore for just a minute. This is one of the first places in Shanghai that I used to hang out. during my first couple of months here, just by myself when I was exploring the city. This is the first place that I got to know really well because I worked at Sean's apartment and some other places near this plaza. So I used to come out here a lot before and after work, and I would just kind of wander around this area. If you can see behind me, there is a statue of a guy, and he's sort of doing a weird thing with his thumb, and it kind of looks like maybe he's jerking one off. So that's Thumb Plaza. It's not the most fascinating place in the world, but it holds a special place in my heart. And blah, blah, blah. So let's go and look for Sean's apartment. I think it's behind this plaza. So this is the very first place that I did private one-on-one tutoring in Shanghai, China. It was my very first month here. I was new to ESL, but I was not new to teaching. But I was new to China, and I was new to Chinese culture, and I was new to how people in China perceive the process of education and how they look at children, and I was definitely new on understanding how Chinese culture views children and people with disabilities in general. So as I said before, I showed up at this house, Sean's house, with the understanding that this child had autism or something that resembled autism. They were under the impression that he had some kind of pervasive developmental disorder. But I was not to talk about it. I wasn't to talk to his dad about it. I wasn't supposed to talk to his mom about it. I wasn't supposed to mention it. Elephant in the room. So I said, okay, I can do that. I've had stranger requests in my life working in education. I can do that. So I go to this apartment, which is right over here, building number 22. And I went upstairs. I believe it was the 10th floor. And I met a child. When I went up there, first I met the kid's dad. Sean comes out with biscuits and tea. Okay, this kid is like, I want to say he was 8 years old. He may have been 9 years old. He comes out with a plate of biscuits and a cup of tea for me. And he's drinking a glass of water or orange juice or something. And he sits down and he starts to interview me, this kid. Now this kid is highly articulate. His English was really, really good. He was very articulate, very well spoken. And a really interesting thing that happened during the first few minutes of that first really strange interview that I had with an 8-year-old child trying to get a job working for his dad was the kid says to me, "When is your birthday?" And I said, "My birthday is August the 3rd. And he said, "How old are you?" And I told him I'm 32. And he said, "Oh, you were born in 1982. Just like that. Now, I'm going to have to say I am not really very good with math, and I would probably have to sit down with a pencil and a piece of paper and several minutes to write things down and think about things and calculate somebody's birthday like that. But this little kid, this little 8-year-old kid, he does it just like that, without even thinking about it. I was very impressed by that. Now, most of the questions that this kid asked me were related to numbers. He wanted to know my mom's age, my dad's age. He wanted to know the address of where I grew up. He wanted to know what floor that I lived on in the building that I was in Shanghai, China. He wanted to know what the building number was. He was really interested in anything that had to do with my life that involved numbers. And he remembered everything that I told him on subsequent visits when I started actually working with him. This kid remembered. He remembered everything, and he would repeat it over and over and over again. He remembered, he remembered what building I lived in. He remembered my birthday, my parents' birthday. He remembered everything that I told him that involved numbers. But his father did not want anything to do with this kid's obsession with numbers. He wanted me to discourage it. So whenever I sat down and I talked to this kid about numbers, his dad would come up and say, "No, you can't do that. You can't talk to him about numbers. No numbers, no numbers. No numbers." Now, our first couple of times together, our first couple of lessons were really nice. I just sat with him and we talked, we discussed things. He did want to talk about numbers a lot, and I tried to kind of gear the conversation in other directions. And after the first couple of lessons, his dad became a raging lunatic. So first, I want to say it was the third lesson, he brings out a tripod and a video camera, and he sets up a video camera in the living room and points it at me. He didn't ask for my permission or even tell me why he was doing what he was doing, but he just started videotaping me, and from then on he would videotape all of our lessons. And he decided that he didn't want us to have conversations together. No, what he wanted me to do is he wanted me to take a picture. Now, I had this kid for 2 hours a day, for 2 hours. And his dad wanted me to take a picture and for me and Sean to look at a picture together for 2 hours. One picture for 2 hours. So what he expected me to do with Sean was sit there and say, "Oh, Sean, look at that hat you're wearing. Oh, what color is that hat, Sean?" And Sean would say, "That hat is red." And I would say, "Oh, very good job. How many people are in the picture, Sean? 1, 2, 3. Oh, there are 3 people in the picture." That's what he wanted me to do. Now, there's no kid in the world that would be able to sit down and do that for 2 hours. It's boring and it's condescending. And especially this kid who was miles and miles smarter than his father. There's no way that he was going to do that. And so I kept telling his father, this is not a good idea. It's boring. It's kind of making him agitated. It really just doesn't work. I don't think this is a good idea. This is an English lesson. And what I think we should do is I think we should speak English. The first 2 lessons were really good. He was getting to know me. He was becoming comfortable with me. We learned a little bit about each other. This is how we learn English, by having conversations. So we should just have conversations. If you want us to read from a book, we can read from a book. But sitting and staring at one picture for 2 hours is just going to make everybody agitated. But his dad insisted. He insisted that we do this. And he would get really angry if I ever deviated from it. And he kept coming up with these really strange lessons, Like one day he handed me a little Lego man. And he said, "You and Sean should talk about this Lego man for 2 hours. And then after a couple of weeks, his dad decided that he didn't like me, and he really just turned on me. And so he thought, well, since this teacher is obviously an idiot, he needs to be told what to say. So he would sit next to me, and I kid you not, I am not exaggerating when I say this. He would whisper in my ear everything that he wanted me to say as a response to something that Sean said. So Sean would say "Oh, his hat is red." And Sean's dad would say, oh, now say, "Yes, Sean, his hat is red." And I would look over at Sean and say, "Yes, Sean, his hat is red." And Sean would be like, "Okay, I don't want to do this anymore." And Sean's dad would be like, say, "No, Sean, you have to do this. You must do this." And I would look over at Sean and say, "No, Sean, you have to do this. You must do this." Now, Sean was a smart kid, but he had some behavioral issues. So when he got angry, he got really angry, and he would throw stuff around and yell and scream. And then he didn't understand why Sean would get upset with me. And he would say things like, "Oh, Sean doesn't like you. Why doesn't Sean like you? He liked the other teacher. Why doesn't he like you? Why can't you hold his attention? It seems like Sean's always yelling at you. Why is he always yelling at you?" And I was like, "Dude, the reason that he hates me is because of the way that you're forcing me to teach. If you just went into the other room, just go in the kitchen, drink a beer or something, dude, and let me teach this kid. I know how to teach. I was doing fine the first couple of days, but now all of a sudden you're jumping on me and you're forcing all this boring stuff on us. And frankly, it's stupid. It's stupid. He's never going to learn. All you're going to do is further irritate this kid." So at the end of this whole experience, I was getting really, really irritated because it just got worse and worse. As Sean's behavior toward me got worse, Sean's father got worse in terms of him nagging at me and trying to control the lesson. And he would critique my English. "No, don't say that. You need to say it like this." Dude couldn't even speak English. But really the major problem with that job was the fact that if we had just been able to acknowledge the fact that this kid had some kind of developmental disorder, we would have been able to help him to a much greater degree. If everybody just stopped playing games, if everybody just stopped pretending, if we could just say, "Hey, the kid's got some issues and maybe we need to address those issues." You know, I'm not a diagnostician. I'm not even a real teacher. But I've worked in the field. I'm familiar with the symptoms. I'm familiar with some of the ways that we go about dealing with these symptoms. Hey, I'm the perfect person to teach this kid, you know, but you gotta lay off. But I couldn't say that to him because we weren't to acknowledge that Sean had developmental disorders. We weren't to acknowledge that he had issues. And when we don't acknowledge the issues, we can't fix them. We can't deal with them. We can't address them properly. So we never did. We never got anywhere. It was just Sean's dad yelling and screaming at me, Sean yelling and screaming at me, Sean's dad saying, "Hey, why is Sean upset with you?" Over spring holiday, he told me that we're gonna take a couple weeks off and he would get back in contact with me, and he never did. So that is my story of the very first private one-to-one ESL tutoring job that I had in Shanghai, China. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching Triad Travelogues. I'm Richard. I'll see you next time.